We often think of the survival of the early Christian church as this purely theological inevitability, right? But what if I told you that in its most crucial early centuries, this ancient Jewish sect actually outmaneuvered the massive, overwhelming Roman imperial machine through an accidental legal loophole? It's true. In this explainer, we're going to bypass the usual Sunday school lessons and dive straight into the incredibly dense law, the politics, and the bureaucratic survival tactics of a movement that literally changed the course of history.
Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. Section 1. What was the way? 2. The Roman legal shield. 3. The imperial cult collision. 4. The Great Crackdown. And finally, 5. The shift to Rome.
So we really have to start with this big, overarching question. How on earth did a tiny, seemingly insignificant movement from a turbulent, rebellious province manage to survive the strict, legally rigid, and incredibly violent Roman Empire? As you'll see, it wasn't just about what they believed. It was entirely about how the Roman legal system categorized them.
Let's get into Section 1. What exactly was the Way?
Well, before it was ever called Christianity, this movement was known simply as the Way. If you read through the book of Acts, this term pops up constantly. And the vital context you need here is that in traditional Jewish thought, the Way is actually a metaphor for the Torah, the specific path prescribed by God. So the earliest followers of Jesus weren't trying to start a brand new religion from scratch, not at all. They were operating strictly as a Jewish sect, worshiping the God of Israel, and fundamentally observing Jewish law.
To put that into perspective, think about the command in Deuteronomy to not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. When ancient texts describe this path as narrow, they aren't always talking about a path of agonizing physical suffering. They're describing a path that is bounded. It's hemmed in, strictly defined by rules and instructions. Think of it like a highway with very clear guardrails. This was a movement deeply, inextricably rooted in Jewish tradition and law.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Roman legal shield.
This is where the history gets really wild. We have this crucial phase between 30 and 60 CE of total blurring. Basically, Roman administrators literally could not tell the followers of the Way apart from any other Jewish sect. To Rome, they were all just Jews. We see this perfectly illustrated in the Gallio precedent from Acts 18. A big dispute breaks out, and the Roman proconsul Gallio basically rolls his eyes and dismisses the whole case. He essentially says, look, this is an internal debate about your own law and your own prophets, leave me out of it. And because Rome viewed them simply as Jews, these early followers inherited a massive accidental legal loophole. Judaism was a recognized ancient religion, which meant they received traditional legal exemptions. Most importantly, they were shielded from having to participate in pagan civic duties and the Roman imperial cult.
But of course, that loophole couldn't last forever. Section 3, the imperial cult collision.
As more and more Gentiles, non-Jews, started joining the Way, the group began visibly separating from traditional Judaism. And the moment that happened, poof, they lost that legal shield, exposing a massive, very dangerous ideological clash. Just contrast the rigid monotheism of the Way with the Roman imperial cult. Rome viewed the emperor as Divus or Theos, a literal, physical representative of the divine who protected the entire world. Standard Roman inscriptions honored the emperor as the God and Savior. So when followers of the Way started subversively applying those exact imperial titles to Jesus, to Rome, that wasn't just a religious disagreement. That was politically subversive. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the state. This cultural clash got incredibly severe. The Greek philosopher Celsus, writing around 177 CE, actually attacked these early Christians for atheism. Now, I know that sounds super weird to us today, but Roman elites fundamentally viewed religion differently. Religion was a civic duty. Because Christians outright refused to burn incense to the emperor or participate in the polytheistic festivals that Romans believed kept the empire safe, they were labeled atheists. They weren't doing their part to keep the gods happy, which made them a dangerous, destabilizing threat to the entire empire.
And that brings us to Section 4, the Great Crackdown.
Watching this evolution build over time is fascinating. We see Rome's strategy completely shift. What started as just random, localized mob violence eventually transformed into highly systematic, empire-wide purges. By 250 CE, Emperor Decius initiated a massive loyalty test, and then by 303 CE, Diocletian launched the Great Persecution. It wasn't until 311 and 313 CE that the state finally backed down. And it's really important to understand just how incredibly bureaucratic this persecution was.
Emperor Decius genuinely believed the Roman Empire was collapsing entirely because citizens had abandoned the traditional gods. So what does he do? He introduces the libellus. This was literally a paper certificate issued by the government. It was an administrative receipt used to systematically root out absolutely anyone who wouldn't conform to the Roman state religion.
Try to imagine the excruciating choice Christians faced under Decius. It was a step-by-step nightmare. First, you have to physically step up and offer a pagan sacrifice while a magistrate watches you. Second, you burn incense to the Roman gods. If you do this, you get the libellus, your proof of loyalty. Refuse, and you face brutal torture and execution. This legally coordinated purge caused a massive crisis inside the movement. Many Christians actually panicked and complied, or they bribed officials to get fake certificates. And that survival tactic later sparked massive, bitter theological debates over whether those who lapsed and bought the fake papers could ever be forgiven.
Then, half a century later, Emperor Diocletian takes the crackdown and turns it up to 11. He realizes punishing individuals isn't working, so he goes after the infrastructure. He systematically tries to destroy the institutional framework of the movement. He targets their assets, burning scriptures and tearing down their meeting spaces. He targets the hierarchy, systematically arresting and executing the leadership, the bishops and deacons. And finally, he just completely strips Christian citizens of their legal status and judicial rights.
But here is the crazy part. Despite all this organized state-sponsored terror, it failed. The Christian network was just too vast, too resilient. In 311 CE, Emperor Galerius, who was dying of a horrific disease, officially throws in the towel and concedes defeat. He issues the Edict of Serdica, halting the purges. And just look at the incredible irony in his official decree. He actually asks the surviving Christians to pray to their God for our safety and that of the state. The mighty Roman Empire blinked first.
Finally, Section 5, the shift to Rome.
Enter Emperor Constantine. Constantine is a master politician. To avoid civil war, he knows he can't just force everyone to convert overnight. Instead, he uses a brilliant political strategy called syncretism, blending beliefs together. He starts using ambiguous language, referring to the highest God. He heavily blends Christian concepts with his own ongoing devotion to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. For example, his famous Sunday law in 321 CE didn't officially mandate rest for a newly invented Christian holiday. It mandated rest on the venerable day of the sun, a term perfectly acceptable to both his pagan and his Christian subjects. And when theological divisions threatened to fracture his empire, he literally stepped in as a political leader to convene the Council of Nicaea, tying church governance directly to his own imperial power.
This is where we see the ultimate pivot. This imperial separation resulted in a massive state-enforced de-Judaization of the church. Over the next few decades, the empire systematically severed the religion from its Jewish roots to create total administrative uniformity. The biblical Passover timeline replaced by Easter, fixed onto a Roman calendar. The seventh-day Sabbath was outlawed, making Sunday the legally enforced day of rest. Biblical feasts were swapped out for a newly invented liturgical calendar. Rome was standardizing this faith exactly like they standardized their roads and their taxes. The early localized movement known as the Way was being entirely reshaped into a thoroughly Greco-Roman state institution.
And this new imperial alignment meant the emperor now basically dictated theology. The state was in the driver's seat. We see this vividly a few years later under Emperor Constantius II. He used sheer imperial bullying to force the church into the Arian theological camp, completely overturning the previous councils. St. Jerome famously summarized this massive government overreach by writing, "The world groaned and was astonished to find itself Arian."
Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with one final, very provocative thought. We've seen how the Way initially survived by hiding in plain sight as a Jewish sect. We saw how it endured literal bureaucratic death warrants and how it was finally, ultimately embraced by the Roman emperors themselves. But when you look at all the compromises, the political syncretism, and the imperial decrees that standardize the faith, we really have to ask, when a faith becomes a massive state institution, who really converts? Does the empire convert to the religion, or does the religion convert to the empire? It's a fascinating thing to chew on. Thanks for digging into this history with me today, and keep asking the big questions.